Something enormous just cracked open in the Middle East, and the American media machine is still trying to figure out what story to tell you about it, because the real story doesn't fit the script they've been running for 30 years. What you're about to hear isn't a conspiracy theory, it isn't propaganda from the other side. It is a cold, sober examination of what happens when military assumptions that cost billions of dollars and decades of political capital suddenly collapse in real time, on a battlefield in the dark against a country that Washington spent years telling you was backward, isolated, and on the verge of collapse. The Fath-360 just changed the conversation, and if you care about where American power is headed, where your tax dollars are going, and whether the men and women in uniform are being sent into a conflict built on assumptions that no longer hold, then you need to sit with this, not for 30 seconds of headline consumption, but for the full weight of what it actually means. Because what we are watching unfold right now in the skies above the Middle East is not just a weapons story. It is a story about empire, about illusions, about the gap between what America's defense establishment tells the public and what is actually happening on the ground. And that gap, my friends, is getting very, very wide. Let's start from the beginning, because context is everything here. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated surprise attack on Iran. That fact alone should stop you in your tracks. The United States, not in response to a direct attack on American soil, not with a declaration of war from Congress, not with any of the constitutional scaffolding that is supposed to govern when the most powerful military in human history decides to go to war, began bombing a sovereign nation. They killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in the opening hours. They killed senior IRGC commanders. They struck nuclear facilities, military bases, hospitals, schools, bridges, and a century-old medical research institution, the Pasteur Institute of Tehran. And they did this while Iran was sitting at the negotiating table. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed there was no evidence of an active, structured nuclear weapons program when this war began. Let that sink in for a moment. Now, the official justifications have shifted around like sand dunes in a windstorm. At different moments, different officials have offered different explanations: to preempt an imminent threat, to prevent a nuclear weapon, to secure oil resources, to achieve regime change. You can't have all of those simultaneously without acknowledging that none of them are the real reason. And as someone who has spent years studying how power operates, how narratives are constructed and dismantled, and how empires justify expansion, I recognize this pattern. These are not strategic rationales. These are rhetorical cover stories for a decision that was made long before any of the stated triggers materialized. But here's where the story takes a turn that not even the architects of this war were prepared for. Iran fought back, not symbolically, not with a few token missiles lobbed toward empty fields. Iran fought back with a ferocity and a technical sophistication that has left the entire military strategic establishment of the West quietly re-examining its assumptions. And the Fath-360 is right at the center of that reckoning. So what exactly is the Fath-360? Because before we talk about what it's allegedly done, we need to understand what it is. The Fath-360, also designated the BM-120, is an Iranian-designed, solid-fueled, satellite-guided tactical ballistic missile. It was publicly unveiled in April 2022 on Iran's Army Day, and it was developed by Iran's own aerospace industries organization. It is compact enough that multiple launchers can be mounted on a single truck. It travels at Mach 3, and with satellite guidance, reports suggest it can push to Mach 4 on terminal approach. It carries a 150-kilogram warhead. Its range sits between 30 and 120 kilometers, with a newer extended variant reportedly pushing to 180 kilometers, and crucially, it uses GNSS satellite navigation combined with an inertial navigation system as a backup, making it genuinely precise in a tactical environment. Now here is the part that the Western defense establishment found deeply inconvenient. This is not a sophisticated, expensive, rare system that took a nation-state decades and unlimited resources to develop. It is relatively small, relatively cheap, highly mobile, quick to redeploy after firing, a shoot-and-scoot system in the truest sense, and it can be produced in quantity. You can hide the launcher on what looks like a commercial truck. You can move it through a city. You can disperse launchers across a wide terrain and create targeting problems that overwhelm even the most advanced radar and interception networks. The Fath-360 is not a glamorous weapon. It is a practical one. And practical weapons, used with discipline and tactical intelligence, have a habit of upending wars that were supposed to be short and decisive. Now let's talk about what has been reported in the context of this war. Iran's intelligence, and this has been documented, successfully ran a network of spies for hire that filmed sensitive Israeli military sites, including Nevatim Air Base, which is home to Israel's fleet of F-35I fighters, the most advanced aircraft in the Israeli Air Force. Iran used those coordinates, the precise geographic data of where those aircraft sit, where the hangars are, where the runways stretch, to guide its ballistic missile retaliations. There are reports of coordinated strikes that employed waves of cheap decoy drones to saturate Israeli and American radar systems, exhausting interceptor missiles and operator attention, and then following up with more precise ballistic strikes timed to arrive when the defensive windows were narrowest. This is not primitive tactics. This is layered, coordinated, adaptive warfare. The claims about the scale of F-35 destruction are contested and need to be said clearly. There is no single verified figure that independent analysts can confirm. What is not contested is this: there has been damage at Nevatim Air Base, satellite imagery has shown holes in hangar roofs, Israeli authorities quietly acknowledge that some air bases were hit, and Iranian state media has made claims about F-35 losses that Israeli authorities have been, shall we say, less than fully transparent about. And let us recall something important from the prior 12-day war in June 2025. Iran made claims during that conflict of downing Israeli F-35 jets. The IDF denied them. Then, in December 2025, Iran's own military admitted that those earlier claims from the 12-day war were false. So you have a pattern here on both sides, where the information space is deliberately obscured, where both governments have strong incentives to lie, Iran to project strength and deterrence, Israel to protect its most expensive and psychologically critical military asset. But here is what we do know, that no one is seriously disputing. Since the start of this war on February 28th, the United States has lost at least 12 MQ-9 Reaper drones. U.S. officials confirmed that 5 KC-135 refueling aircraft were damaged in an Iranian missile strike at a base in Saudi Arabia. 3 U.S. F-15E Strike Eagle jets went down to a friendly fire incident officially involving a Kuwaiti aircraft, with all 6 crew members fortunately surviving. Iranian state media reported a U.S. fighter jet was shot down over central Iran, and 2 unnamed U.S. officials speaking to Reuters confirmed it. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth then, in the middle of an active war, abruptly fired the Army Chief of Staff, along with 2 other senior officers. You fire the top general during a war when either the war is going badly or the politics around the war are going catastrophically, or both. There is no other reason. Think about what that firing tells you from a structural standpoint. The civilian leadership of the Pentagon is purging military leadership mid-conflict. That is not a sign of a campaign proceeding smoothly. That is a sign of institutional panic and a desperate attempt to manage a narrative that is slipping away. The death toll in Iran, as of early April 2026, stands at over 2,076 confirmed killed and 26,500 wounded. Those are the figures from Iran's own health ministry, and they include an 8-month-old infant and an 88-year-old grandmother. More than 600 schools and educational centers have been struck. The Pasteur Institute, a scientific institution with a century of history, a place that has contributed to global public health, bombed. Bridges described as civilian infrastructure bombed, with U.S. officials offering post hoc justifications that Iran has rejected. And what is the strategic outcome? After 5 weeks of this, Iran has not capitulated. The IRGC hardliners are apparently dominating decision-making. There has been no mass defection, no popular uprising organized enough to threaten the regime's physical control of the country. Iran has kept the Strait of Hormuz closed, the artery through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply flows, causing energy prices to spike and ripple through the global economy. Iran has struck targets across 9 countries in the region: Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and an Iranian drone struck a British military base in Cyprus. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan have jointly called for an immediate ceasefire, warning of global impacts on energy, trade, and logistics. The United Nations Security Council has passed a resolution condemning Iran's retaliatory strikes, but crucially, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres condemned the original US-Israeli attacks as well. This is not a war that is going the way its architects promised it would go. This is a war that has turned into exactly the kind of protracted, costly, regionally destabilizing quagmire that serious military strategists warned about privately while the political class charged ahead. And the Fath-360, along with Iran's broader tactical missile and drone arsenal, sits at the center of why those private warnings were correct. Here is the deeper question that Americans ought to be asking right now. The F-35 program has cost the United States and its allies over $1.7 trillion across its full life cycle. That is not a typo, it is the most expensive weapon system in human history. It was sold to the American public, to Congress, to Israel, and to NATO allies as an essentially invincible platform. Fifth-generation stealth technology, a 360-degree sensor suite, radar systems so sophisticated that no adversary could realistically target it, and Iran, with ballistic missiles that cost a small fraction of what each F-35 costs, guided by satellite navigation systems that are comparatively simple in design, fired from trucks that look like commercial vehicles, has managed to, at minimum, damage, and by some accounts destroy, aircraft that were supposed to be untouchable. Even if the more dramatic claims are exaggerated, even if the real numbers are lower than Iran states, the fundamental equation has shifted. The myth of the invincible fifth-generation fighter jet has been stress-tested in actual combat conditions, and it has not emerged unscathed. Now, why does this matter for you, sitting in the United States, watching this on your phone or your television? Because this is not just a story about the Middle East. This is a story about the architecture of American power, and whether it is as solid as you have been told. For decades, the argument for American military dominance, the argument for the trillion-dollar weapons programs, the argument for maintaining hundreds of military bases across the globe, that argument has rested on a foundational claim that American technology is so far ahead of any adversary that the outcome of any conflict is essentially predetermined. Iran has just put a crack in that foundation. Not a fatal crack, perhaps, not a collapse of the entire structure, but a visible, undeniable crack that will need to be answered, not with more spending and more denial, but with a genuine reassessment of whether the strategy itself is coherent. Because here is the thing about the Fath-360 that the defense analysts buried in the footnotes of their technical reports already understood. It was supplied to Russia for use in Ukraine. Russian personnel were trained in Iran to operate it. The missile that has been causing problems in the Middle East has also been part of Russia's tactical arsenal against Ukraine. And the lesson that every potential adversary of the United States is drawing from watching this conflict, China, North Korea, every nation that has studied how American military power actually performs under sustained pressure, is that saturation tactics, cheap precision weapons used in volume, and the systematic exploitation of the gaps and limitations in even the most advanced air defense networks represent a viable strategy against an opponent that has spent its resources on expensive, individually powerful platforms. The Strait of Hormuz is closed, Easter Mass has been cancelled in Dubai because of the war, a Bangladeshi farm worker in the UAE was killed by falling shrapnel, the world's oil supply is in disruption, over 2,000 Iranians are dead, including children. American soldiers have been killed and wounded across the region. And the political leadership of the United States, the people who made this decision, who chose this moment, who launched this war while Iran was at the negotiating table, are still crafting the message about what this all means and why it was worth it. You deserve better than the message. You deserve the reality. And the reality is that the Fath-360 striking F-35 infrastructure is not just a military story. It is a mirror being held up to an era of American foreign policy that has consistently overestimated its own invincibility, underestimated the adaptive intelligence of its adversaries, and paid the price, not in the offices of the people who make these decisions, but in blood and treasure, in economic disruption and geopolitical realignment, in the slow erosion of the moral credibility that once gave American power its deepest source of strength. The world is watching. And what it is seeing is not the confirmation of American dominance. What it is seeing is an empire discovering the limits of force, one Mach 3 missile at a time.